On va laisser les gens s'asseoir. Hi, Vikram. Good. That's mine. I have your notebook. Are you okay? Are you good?
Yes.
Okay.
Mostly.
Okay. Well, hopefully being around friends. Okay, well, we are about to start. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're going to start in 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. I'd like to invite you to take your seats. We are about to start. Well, let me start by thanking our host, the NDC Partnership, for providing the space for this important discussion. I would like also to mention that this is webcast, and there will be also recording available later. So be on your best behavior. You're on camera. Esteemed guests, distinguished panelists, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I know we are all very busy and it takes a lot of effort to go from one side to the venue to the other. So thank you so much for making it here. Us. So we convened today to consider a critical question of how we can accelerate the energy transition in this critical decade, not only through raising ambition, but by ensuring implementation proceeds at speed and scale. The Global Stocktake synthesis report, as you know, has sent a resounding message that our collective and individual efforts are not sufficient. We are falling short of meeting the 1.5 goal set by the Paris Agreement. And with the energy sector's emission at a all-time high and the devastating impact of climate change being felt all around the globe, here at COP28, the leaders, all of us, are being urged to take decisive action. In response to this imperative, there's been a very strong call for a new ambitious target. And this target, as you are well familiar with, is the tripling of global renewable energy capacity and the doubling of energy efficiency by 2030. We are very encouraged that more than 110, and I'm looking at Bruce here for the detailed count, 118 countries have signed up to the commitment to triple the world's energy capacity by 2030. And we wish to see this target enshrined in the decision text. At RMI, we believe the benefits of such a goal are clear and inevitable. The tripling of renewable energy will send very strong signal to the markets on the need to scale up renewable energy globally and increase international and domestic financial flows toward low emission capacity, while ensuring that economies of scale will further drive down the price of renewable energy and battery storage. So this combination of exponential growth of low-cost clean energy coupled with continuing gains in energy efficiency is already creating virtuous cycle, setting the stage for a collapse of the demand for fossil fuels. We really see this target as the enabler for the phasing down and phasing out of fossil fuels. But what's more is that we know the science and research confirms that it is technically feasible to reach this target. We acknowledge that political support, however, is critical to ensure the proper and equitable deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies. At COP28, there needs to be a clear understanding of the implementation pathway for the proposed target to ensure the delivery and accountability of such a target. The international community must put forward an equally ambitious support package to ensure that both the developed and the developing countries are benefiting from the renewable energy upscale and that no one is left behind. Against that backdrop, today's event seeks to further explore how such an ambitious target can enhance the revised NDCs, which are due next year, and encourage accelerated implementation. Our expert panelists will delve into key areas exploring the new goals integration within existing commitments, the necessary creation of enabling environment through policy measures, overcoming energy project barriers, and importantly, how we can continue to prioritize national and local needs for a just and equitable energy transition. So thank you once again for being part of this pivotal discussion. And it's now my distinct pleasure to welcome our event moderator to the stage, Ms. Xingfu Berto, Director of Energy Diplomacy at the European Climate Foundation. Please, Xing, the stage is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Letitia, for that incredible introduction. And as Letitia mentioned, I am Xingfu Berto. I work at the Pool Fund for International Energy, and we're extremely pleased to be partnering with RMI on this great event. So, Letitia, you said it. It's about setting the goal, and it's about delivering the goal. And now we're going to talk about delivering the goal with a great panel and different perspectives, one from the industry, one from government, one from a non-profit institution doing work on the ground, and one from philanthropy. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the stage, please come up and take your seat as I call you up, Mr. Bruce Douglas, CEO of the Global Renewables Alliance. Hi, Bruce. Additionally, please also welcome Dr. Spencer Thomas, Grenada's ambassador and special envoy for multilateral environmental agreements. Great to see you again, Dr. Spencer. Mr. Garrett Walsh, Director for Climate and Energy at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. And Mr. Eric Wendlis, Head of Solutions at GEAP, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. A warm thank you to our panelists for joining us here today and sharing their expertise and perspectives. So we have 40 minutes and 5 speakers. So for the sake of equity, please keep your remark succinct and short. So Bruce, I'd like to start with you. In the lead up to COP, the GRA and partners have led the campaign for a new goal to triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency capacity by 2030. Can you tell us about why this is important and how will we hold parties accountable, those who have signed? And then following upon that, we'd like to know, of course, the implementation part. Is tripling renewable energy really possible in 7 years? And what are the barriers that you're seeing in developing countries and in developed countries? Just a few questions.
Thanks so much. And your comment was during Plus Partners, and I think that Plus Partners is the important piece. I'd like to thank Letitia and RMI for your support of what we've been trying to do over the last few months. And so far we've collected on our side over 300 organizations that support the tripling of renewable energy. More importantly, as you may have seen last night, the launch event of the pledge from the countries, where there is now 118, I believe it may have been 119 countries if New Zealand have resigned, to support that tripling to 11,000 gigawatts. And I will say thank you so much to the Minister in Grenada for your support and endorsement of the tripling pledge. We in the GRA, we call it signed, sealed, delivered. And the signed is about the ambition, and that's done. So we have the endorsement from a large number of countries, which sends a very strong signal for the development of renewable energy. My fault. My area of expertise is not IT, as you see. But the pledge really sends a very strong signal to the industry. But what we need now is it to be sealed. And what I mean by that is it needs to be included in the negotiated text. So that's what we're working on at the moment, to make sure that there's clear, unambiguous language in that final negotiated text. And the final piece, which is obviously the most difficult bit, is to deliver. And that goes on to your point about what the barriers are. So currently we see it's inevitable to double renewable energy capacity by 2030, which would be something like 8,000 gigawatts. In order to get to 11,000 gigawatts, the tripling, we will need to build and connect something like 3 gigawatts of renewable energy per day, every day, up to 2030. And if you know what 3,000 megawatts of renewable energy looks like, you get the impression of the challenge we face. So the enablers, we call them in their challenges, but of course we focus on how we can get it done. And we would say, yes, we can. The technology is mature, it's cost competitive, but now we need the policy frameworks in place. And I'm just going to highlight 4 areas. One is on finance. So especially in emerging markets and developing economies, we need access to low cost of capital, especially in this high interest environment. It's sometimes 2, 3, or even 5 times more expensive to the cost of capital in those markets than it is in the developed economies. So that needs to be addressed. There's several ways to do that. We actually issued a report with IRENA and COP28 a few weeks ago, identifying many of those solutions. The second is on permitting. So that's to get it built. And currently there's several thousand gigawatts of renewable capacity stuck in permitting. The third is grids. Again, several thousand gigawatts of capacity stuck waiting for connection to the grid. And finally is on the value chain. So that's critical materials, jobs, and of course, the manufacturing capacity. I'll stop there, but we have the solutions. We now need to implement them, and we welcome the support of RMI in helping to achieve that. Thank you, Ching. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Yeah, finance, grid, value chains. We have the solutions, but implementation is needed to make it happen in 7 years, almost 6, if that's the target that we've set ourselves. I would like to move on to Ambassador Thomas. Ambassador, SIDS are disproportionately affected by climate change, with 7 times more natural disasters than other states, and paying 3 times the global average for electricity prices. I would like to ask you, how would SIDS benefit from such a global target? And what are the policy measures and the support that is needed in order to be able to integrate this goal within existing commitment into the revision and the implementation of the next round of NDCs? Is this a moment that we can use to foster increased ambition?
Hello? Hello? It's working now. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I think you asked me a lot of questions at one time, so I will try to see how best I can do in the time allocated. You mentioned early on, as I indicated early on, as you indicated early on in your presentation from the moderator, the issues relating to the benefits. We have to say that it will be tremendous benefits will be according to us if we go down that route as indicated in the pledge. We recognize that, let me just go back to 2004 in Grenada. We had a hurricane. In the space of 2 hours, we lost 220% of the gross domestic product in the country in 2 hours. That means after that, you will have to go to the market to rebuild debt. So the question here is, you have more debt. And then the price of electricity in the Caribbean and in Grenada, tremendously high. So now you have to, it accounts maybe in some places, 70% of your import earnings has to go to pay for fossil fuel. And the same fossil fuel caused the hurricanes caused the debt. So we are in this cycle. So the question is, can this pledge break that cycle? And what is the impact on that pledge on breaking that cycle? We believe that there are tremendous benefits. We could look at the benefits on the economic side, on the social side, or on the environmental side. Or we could also look at it in terms of people, communities, countries, and natural ecosystems. Of course, on the economic side, you will have a positive on your balance of payments and your fiscal balance. Employment will be a critical issue, again, another positive. Of course, we heard from IPCC in terms of the reducing cost of renewable energy and energy efficiency solutions, and the technology is there for us, as you indicated, technically feasibility. We can increase the competitiveness of the economy, and of course, it has a positive on the debt and also on the growth of the country. With respect to the social side, of course, the health issue is prominent, the livelihoods is prominent, energy security, food security, all of these will be impacted positively as a consequence of this. Reduced importation, of course, of fossil fuel and issues like that. And critically, the whole question of the psychosocial aspects. After the hurricanes, the impact on the psychosocial is very critical on the communities, especially young people and so on. All of that will be impacted. The trauma will be reduced. And on the environmental side, of course, we have the greenhouse gas reductions, and we have ecosystem could be protected. Coral reefs, we understand, is significantly impacted in the region. So that will be in my response to the benefits. With respect to your second question about the policies and regulations, I think they are necessary. And I could use the cliche, necessary but not sufficient. I think we need more than policies and regulations. I think we need leadership. We will need a vision. We will need to focus on that vision. We will need buy-in from the communities. We will need community involvement. We'll also need to take a holistic approach, an inclusive approach to that. I think all of these ingredients are necessary to accompany the policies and to accompany. We need to look at the links to the livelihoods in the communities also. All of these will be critical issues. So not only incentives, in terms of policy incentives. That is good, it's helpful, but it's certainly not enough. It needs to be complemented by that vision and that leadership. And your third area that you indicated is, where are we now in our NDC? We think that our NDC is sufficiently ambitious. We are coming from a very low area in terms of the fossil fuel, in terms of the renewable mix in the fossil fuel system in Grenada. Maybe about 3 or 4%, it will be renewable. So tripling this is really not the way to go. We need to do much more than that. And the NDC is clearly in that direction. So we believe that we need to look at it in that way on a national level, not only on the national, on the regional level. As indicated earlier on, finance is key. Our NDC is conditional on receipt of financing. And I believe that if we use the strategy of leadership and vision combined with finance, and we know what we have to do, the path is very clear. IPCC has clearly indicated a pathway forward. And I think if we take that course, we will be able to achieve that objective. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your leadership and for the inspiration. We're hearing the global goal does not necessarily translate into a tripling in countries. For some countries, it's a ×5. For some countries, it's less, depending on what the baseline is. And we're also hearing it's a global goal, but it's about domestic narratives of resilience, economic competitiveness, energy security, reduced dependence on imported fossil fuels. So with that, I would like to continue my journey on the panel with Mr. Garrett Walsh. And we were hearing from Bruce that the solutions are there. The grids, the finance, the value chain all need to be addressed. And one of the key aspects of addressing those is to be able to develop bankable projects. So I would like to ask you, we know that many of renewable energy projects get stuck at the very early stage of project development. So what, given your work in Africa, can you provide us some example on how we can overcome project barriers to de-risk projects and increase bankability and have that pipeline that we need in order to be implementing this global target at scale?
Thank you. Thank you. Too loud. Hi, everyone. So I guess just very brief introduction to the Tony Blair Institute. We have about 600 advisors globally embedded supporting governments in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean. So fully agree with you on the challenge. And the challenge is basically that there's not enough projects reaching financial close and being developed. And even the projects where that does happen, it takes far, far, far too long. And you've got this challenge at the moment where from sort of project inception to then the developers doing the work to get a project ready for investment, to then engaging with the financiers and actually sort of commissioning the project can sometimes take sort of 3 to 6 years. And obviously that's not good enough for the planet, but also it doesn't really align with sort of the politics as well. You imagine a sort of president comes into power, he's usually only got sort of 4 or 5 years of a term. If this spans over presidential terms, you quite often see interest being lost and focus moving. So I think we really need to get that pipeline moving much, much, much quicker. One of the big, I'd say there are probably 2 challenges beyond the project level. One is at a sector level, and I think to drive the investment in renewables that we need, we're really looking at transitioning a lot of countries beyond just the energy transition itself. They need to actually transition from an environment where I'd say energy investment is large projects delivered in an opaque way. They need to move to a system where they need lots and lots and lots of small projects delivered in a sort of very transparent and programmatic way. And that transition itself is actually politically quite hard. As you can imagine, you're going to cut across vested interests within the utility, maybe with the people who import oil and diesel into the country. So I think unless there's real senior level political buy-in that this is what we're doing, the likelihood that when we hit this first sort of speed bump along that road and there's the first amount of pushback that the wheels come off is quite high. So I do think that initial engagement, and for me that's something that sort of is lacking a little bit at the moment. And then obviously once you've got that engagement, it's moving to programs rather than projects, right? We don't want to spend 5 years developing 10 megawatts of solar. We want to spend 5 years putting in place a program that can ultimately scale maybe 2 gigawatts of solar, right? And I think that's another big sort of gap. In terms of the risks, so I'd say a few different, major risks. And frankly, most of the risks that stop projects moving ahead are the risks that are within the control of the government. So you would have risks like identifying the land, risks like clearing the land, risks like ensuring that there's the connection to the grid. What we're seeing in Africa is there's about 4 gigawatts of projects that we've been engaged on that are stuck across 5 different countries, all for fundamentally the same issue, all for the issue of the revenue risk and the currency risk. So in Africa, only 2 of the utilities in Africa are actually financially solvent, as in the revenues cover the costs. And what we're actually seeing is projects simply can't move ahead because the investors have no confidence that they're actually going to get the revenue. I think in terms of solutions, and what we're sort of looking at in Zambia is, how can you leverage the balance sheet of the mining companies as opposed to the suboptimal balance sheet of the utility, And the country's also under an IMF program, so it can't borrow or provide guarantees anyway. But how can you leverage that to actually underpin and drive the investment? So I think you've got potential solutions there. And then the other big solution that I see, particularly for Africa, is this concept of green industrialization. So you've seen things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism coming in Europe, providing a sort of an incentive for industries to want to contract and potentially pay a premium for green energy. And in Mozambique, we're working on a couple of very large hydro projects, sort of 1.5 gigawatts of hydro. And the primary market for that is to tag that to large industrial off-takers, probably aluminium, who will then be prepared to sort of sign a long-term contract for the renewable power, pay a premium off the back of sort of global trade policy. So I do think that the linkage between green industry and renewable investment needs to be much, much tighter, because they're the solvent off-takers who can actually drive the investment.
Thank you so much. A really important point about industrial policy. And with that, I would like to turn to Eric. Hello. And we've talked a lot about what needs to be done in order to make a new renewables target successful and how this can increase ambition. We've also talked about the solution space. And but what we've been hearing again and again and again is that it needs to invest in local industrial capacity. And so I would like to ask you, how can we ensure that these projects that we will be developing not only achieve the targets that they've been set, but also create an ecosystem of meaningful employment, livelihood in line with a just transition out of fossil fuels? And what do you think it requires in terms of scaling up supply chains and manufacturing? And then, because you are here with GF, I would like to also ask you what is philanthropy's role and how you see philanthropy contributing to the implementation of that scaled-up renewable energy target.
Thanks, Jing, and thanks for having us. And those are a lot of great questions. I think maybe before diving into them, the 2-second description of what the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet is our mission is to end energy poverty and drive economic development without killing the planet. So that's sort of the mission in a nutshell. And I think we've been making some progress on that thus far. So we just released a progress report that notes that we've avoided 147 million metric tons of CO2 thus far, 1.2 million connections, and 600,000 jobs through the work that we're doing. It's not enough by far, and it's a modest start, but that's sort of what we're trying to do in a nutshell. I think one of the key elements of what we're trying to do, and answering I think your first question, is how do we actually make sure that provision of electricity creates livelihoods and drives economic development and jobs. And I think that for many, many years, there's been this myth of if you build it, it will come in terms of the economic development part of things. And that's just not true. And so I think if we're to meet the commitments that have been made while driving economic development, we need to bring in adjacent programs and efforts to help build the demand side, not just because it helps make things cheaper, but that's what people actually use electricity for. My former colleagues at RMI, Amory Levin's great quip, people don't care about electricity, they care about the value and services it provides. So to that end, some of the things that the Alliance has been doing, and that includes many partners in this room, including RMI and others, are things like the energizing agriculture work in Nigeria, where it's making sure that the business owners and business models that use clean distributed renewable energy are actually there and sort of making money and driving economic development. So I think that's a big thrust of our work. And I think that also helps with the country engagement, because ultimately, really at the end of the day, many countries care about economic development and people as the primary focus of their role as government, and then it's climate. And so I think if you explicitly link those two things together, that's really helpful to help meet commitments and drive agendas of most governments. The third question was on private sector?
Yes, and the role of the private sector in ensuring that the supply chains are built and the manufacturing in the countries. Yeah.
I mean, I think to me the answer on the private sector side is pretty simple, at least from our perspective. And I personally, and I think most people would believe that the private sector is there to make money. It's pretty simple. And if you can show that there's a profitable case to make money through productive use of electricity, through renewables, through distributed renewables, as is the case now, the ask of the private sector is just to sort of show up and act on that value proposition. And I think the input to help us do that more effectively is helping shape what they need to see in terms of the private sector is a very big term, but to be able to come in and make money off doing the right things and good things for development.
Thank you so much. Would you also give us a bit of an idea on philanthropy's way in supporting this?
Sure. So I think philanthropy, there's often rhetoric about taking big risk and being first to lose money and all that, and all that's true. But I think more specifically, it really is about finding a couple of programs. As Gareth was saying, it's not projects, it's programs that can really show the way and sort of show a different path, particularly when it involves bringing together things that are not traditionally associated with each other, like provision of electricity and the demand side and business side, and just sort of show that it works and put the money where our mouths are, so to speak. And I think the other piece that we're trying to at least do as an alliance, and again, it's a very broad alliance, is making sure that doesn't happen in isolation, because I think oftentimes what happens with philanthropy is everyone wants their own big new shiny program, and it's not developed in consultation or collaboration with others, and sort of it's a flash in the pan and then it goes away. And so I think the role of philanthropy is to do that, innovative, lose money, put risk money first, but do it in a way that actually leads to something much more than a couple great but limited projects and programs.
Thank you. Thank you. Letitia, I would like to call you back to the panel. And as we've been partnering on this together, I kept hearing you say that energy transition is not only about mitigation, but about adaptation. At first, we were all a bit intrigued, but now I think it's understandable that it's key to building resilience. We've been hearing that in many of the interventions. So can you tell us a bit also how would such a renewables energy goal contribute to meeting countries' adaptation targets?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And I know that usually when we talk about renewable energy, it's through the mitigation lens. And I think what Dr. Spencer Thomas also told us is there's a lot more to consider when we talk about increasing the renewable energy composition of the energy mix. And I recognize in the room our climate finance advisor based in St. Lucia. Especially for small island developing states, it's also a matter of making the energy system, the economy, and the communities more resilient. As Gareth was mentioning, transitioning from a model where we have one big plant providing like the major share of the electricity for all the territory, all the island, makes the society and the economy extremely vulnerable. And when one single extreme weather event happens, if this plant is hit, then we have days, weeks, sometimes months without electricity. In the Caribbean, for example, it has happened, including to Puerto Rico. So we are not only replacing one technology with another, but I think it's a paradigm shift. We are looking at this transition from really a holistic perspective. And what is interesting from a climate finance perspective is that when we are designing those projects, these renewable energy projects, we are actually submitting them to the global funds as adaptation projects with mitigation co-benefits. And we think it's going to address also an issue that we have been grappling with, especially for small developing countries, is that the mitigation potential is really limited. So those projects usually fall through the cracks because they are not the amount of CO2 that can be reduced or avoided is relatively small. So by attacking it from a different angle, we do hope that it will open different avenues for financing. Also, obviously, the development co-benefits in terms of job creation, in terms of establishing new supply chain, new industries, new markets in a way. And I want to mention, since we have Grenada on the panel, the leadership in the Caribbean in that discussion. Not only Caribbean countries have been putting forward ambitious targets in their NDCs, they have been developing projects, and RMI has been very much involved in supporting the development of those projects, and even more in the coming year through the establishment of a project preparation and development facilities that will help not only on the technical side, preparing all the technical package for those projects, but also on the de-risking side. So those countries have shown leadership, but also leadership in making this transition their own. There is more and more discussion about establishing factories, assembly factories for PVs in Trinidad and Tobago. And there is a very serious proposal on the table. And I think this demonstrates that those countries are not obviously waiting to be transferred the technology. They want to own it, and they want to really take advantage of this transition. And I think this is extremely encouraging. And from your intervention, Gareth, I think the potential there is immense. And sometimes we oppose this discussion around tripling renewable energies from the mitigation angle and the SDG 7. This is where we can reconcile both. And I hope that would be my desired takeaway from this COP, that we go beyond that dichotomy and we really work together in achieving both goals. They are not different. They are really going hand in hand. And I hope that we get there. We get to this understanding here that developing renewable energy is not going to create new barriers or new conditionalities to development.
Thank you so much, Laetitia. So does it mean cover decision then?
Well, I mean, you have to ask the negotiators on the panel, but I think to also react to what Bruce was saying, and I would love to hear also how Bruce wants to see that reflecting in a decision. Maybe provide us some language that we can shop around. But yes, indeed, although the voluntary pledge is a major step forward, if we want to have a robust monitoring system, accountability system, and also making sure that this priority is enshrined in the operation priorities of the climate funds, we'd rather have it in a decision. And we'd rather have it guiding the GCF, guiding the MDBs to make sure that they cannot, escape their responsibility there.
Thank you. Bruce, you wanted to react to that?
Yeah, just maybe I respond very briefly, and I apologize. I'll have to leave in 1 minute to another delegation meeting. But yeah, absolutely critical that it gets into that decision text. Now, one could argue how powerful that is, will that have teeth, and so on. But, that is the clear next step. So the voluntary pledge is important, and we see that as a strong signal. We can provide language. We have that. I think, Jing, I've already sent to you, but we'll circulate that. We've also circulated to some of the parties to start pushing that. It has to be unambiguous, clear, and include that review process. So monitoring and reporting progress towards 2030, on an annual basis. And we as the industry would be delighted to be part of that process. I just want to respond to Dr. Thomas from Grenada. And it's so good to hear, you talking about the benefits of renewables, socioeconomic benefits, energy security, and resilience for your country. That's what we're saying as well. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And as you say, it's now a historic moment for the renewables sector. And we see that the development over the next 7 years will bring a paradigm shift to the energy system. That's what we're talking about. And finally, I'll say that you only need to transition once. So once you've built the grids and built the renewables, you have to operate and maintain them, but you're done. You don't need to buy fuels going forward. And that's really important. People say, oh, it's, continuous capex on renewables. You do it once and it's done. And I think that's an important message for policymakers, investors, NGOs, and the communities, is that, it's not going to be easy. No one said it's going to be easy, but once it's done, it's done. And it needs to be done as fast as possible. Thanks so much for your time, and apologies for leaving so abruptly, and thank you for the panelists.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you so much for your insights. Thanks and your great work. So before we open the floor for questions, it's okay. So before opening the floor for questions, I just wanted to ask our panel, what is the main takeaway that you would like this COP to deliver on energy and on renewable energies?
Well, for me, I think we already have the decisions. We don't need no more decisions. What we need to do is to implement the decisions that we take. And I think that's what we want to get from this COP, that we practically go forward. Because we have been making decisions year on year, and 28 years now we will be making decisions in this COP. I think the idea here now is to implement those decisions. The IPCC spoke clearly, all the science reports spoke clearly on the importance and the role that renewable energy and energy efficiency will play towards the goal of 1.5. I think the idea here now is to find a way in the decisions that we might make today in this COP to ensure that we go to implementation of those decisions.
Thank you.
I mean, for me, it's about the delivery in country beyond the pledges, and I think the political reality is that not that many countries are going to be driven by a pledge. Most decision making in a country is going to be driven by their own domestic needs. So whether that's job creation, access to trade, climate resilience, whatever it might be, that's what's actually going to drive things. And I think there is a gap quite often between the pledge and then let's put in place the framework, be it global trade policy, be it de-risking projects, be it supporting on pipelines, to actually make things move. And I think that's hopefully one of the key things that comes out of this.
I'm optimistic because I think moving beyond pledges, we do have right now funding in the Loss and Damage Fund, which is a pretty important outcome from the first day of this conference. And so I think that's a good news thing, and I agree with everything that's been said. I think to me that the thing to build into it is if you want to drive economic development and economic opportunity, the least cost, fastest way to do that is with renewable energy, and particularly distributed renewable energy.
Thank you, and all of this plus. When we talk about support for implementation, we all immediately think of finance, and of course it is extremely important, and we do hope there will be a pathway for implementation with clear announcement on support. But I think capacity building and technology transfer are also equally important. And by capacity building, we mean building the technical knowledge and the expertise within the region to develop those projects, to really invest in the local developers, to reduce also the dependence on external expertise, and also support government if and when they revise their NDCs, if and when they revise their regulatory framework. So I believe this is something that we need to hear also especially from developed country parties, that they will be there to help countries in this transition every step of the way in a tailored manner, not a one-size-fits-all. And I think that will also really help to build some trust in this process. In the last few days, there's been a lot of big announcements, but also a lot of questions about where this negotiation is going, what is the hidden objectives of the presidency. Let's reset. We are week 2. There's still a lot to be achieved, and I think announcing this support package will go a long way.
Thank you so much. So now I would like to open it up for possible questions that you have for our panelists. Yes? 2 people on the front. Yeah.
Hi, I'm from Mongolia. I worked at the Ministry of Energy. Right now I work at the Ministry of Environment and Tourism, a party delegate. And I have a question regarding reframing the distributed renewable system and the renewable system into adaptation part, because we don't do that, and we face a lot of difficulties when it comes to because Mongolia is such a big country and requires a lot of transmission, etc. Distributed is the best way to go, but getting a funding for it, it's quite challenging when, like you said, considering the mitigation benefits, but there's not a lot of socioeconomic benefit, but it's regional. So how do you phrase into the adaptation? How do you write the benefits, and how do you convince those financiers, especially in the national level program? If we are developing national level program, how do we write that? Thank you.
Let's take a second question, Carolina.
Thank you, Shing. And this is a question maybe for Gareth, but for anyone else in the panel, really. We all know that the cost of capital of renewables continues to be extremely high in many developing countries. What would you say is the most pressing bottleneck to address? Is it risk aversion from MDBs, DFIs, etc.? Is it that there is a lack of maybe innovation in instruments or vehicles? Is it something else?
One question for Letitia on the nexus between mitigation and adaptation, and then a question for Gareth on the cost of capital.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think I don't have an immediate answer, and I think there's a lot of work that is being done around the global goal on adaptation, and I believe it will be helpful to develop better metrics for adaptation projects. I think so far the metrics are very simplistic. And they don't account for this type of nexus or cross-sectoral benefits. So I think we need to invest a little bit more into the research and demonstrating how renewable energy contribute to reducing vulnerability. RMI has done a lot of work in the Caribbean, including at the very practical engineering level, demonstrating how renewable energy projects, in particular solar projects, have been able to survive extreme events, including Cat 5 hurricanes. So I think these type of studies need to be replicated in different parts of the world to clearly demonstrate and provide different indicators. And I know exactly what you're referring to when you look at the templates to the GCF or other funds. Those are not included. It's either mitigation or adaptation, or this like catch-all category cross-cutting that doesn't really mean anything. So yeah, I do believe research is very important at this moment to maximize the co-benefits, benefits and co-benefits. And so I also invite other panelists to share an example of such research or such observation that have been done in other countries.
I think I mean, I was just the sort of, I guess one of the main ways of sort of selling politically the drive for DRE in a country like it's Mongolia, right? Yeah, I think one is the sort of democratization of the investment. So you're moving away from like single, hugely powerful entities that basically control things to this is an investment that we can make across the whole population. That kind of and it's very difficult for sort of domestic businesses to participate in a coal plant, right? It's relatively simple for them to sort of get capital together and participate in sort of grids at a micro level. So there's investment opportunities, and then there's taking control over your own energy resources. And then I think there's just the macro pictures, right? Of this is a balance of payments issue. We're transitioning away from importing fuels. So I think there's a lot of ways that it can be sold, but there's obviously also a lot of ways that it can be blocked. There's a lot of entrenched interests that you have to push against, but getting that narrative right can only be done within the country, and it's tricky, but it has to be based on your context.
Thank you. And then Gareth for the question on
Cost of capital. I can do that.
Yeah, you want to take that?
So Eric, sorry.
Yeah, so on the cost of capital, I think there's always going to be a fundamental baseline, risk assessment associated with a given country, and that needs to be mitigated by all the normal stuff that countries do for macroeconomic risk. To me, the cost of capital, a lot of entities, particularly philanthropic entities, look at that and try and buy it down, but that's a pretty blunt instrument. And to me, cost of capital follows a lot of other sort of, it's the thing that changes based on other actions. It's not something you can really blunt force change. And so I think that there are a couple different things that at least for me, play into changing the risk that are real or perceived. And I think part of it is just showing that people make money and pay back stuff, and that's pretty straightforward, but it doesn't actually happen in a way that's transparent oftentimes to the commercial money in particular. And then I think the second thing, and this is particularly important for smaller markets, is a lot of times the cost of capital is higher than it needs to be just because there's a lot of friction in lending into a given small market. And so some of the stuff that we've been thinking about is how do you aggregate projects, aggregate buyers essentially, so it's easier for larger amounts of cheaper capital to come in, and so you don't have banks and other investors that need to sort of support the work is the same for a bank if it's a $10 transaction as it is for a $100 million transaction, really. And so how do you make the transactions bigger to help drive down the cost? So that's what I would say.
Yes, I think that is the issue. The issue is of scale. I mean, from our perspective, we're talking about small island states here. When Garrett mentioned 2 gigawatts, I shuttled because we're talking about 50 kilowatts as peak capacity here. So the question here is, how do we ensure that we remove the access barriers to finance for these small markets? And that's the question. Remove all of those barriers, barriers which basically makes the cost of capital quite high. I think this is quite important. But for us, we focus a lot on grant resources, especially because of the cycle which I've mentioned, that we have not really contributed, but we are bearing the heaviest burden, and the lady from St. Lucia who is in here will bear me out on this, that we are actually having the burden. So we are looking for grant-based capital as required to transform those economies. Many of the NDCs do have a very strong and renewable energy component, but they are all dependent on international resources of a grant nature. Yeah.
I guess maybe just one thing to add. So, in an ideal world, you're looking at creating an asset class that's standardized, that people can invest in. Because if they don't understand the risk, they'll overprice the risk, right? That's just a fact. So if you can come up with kind of an asset class where this is all entirely standardized, this is the approach, there's a program, the contracts are standardized, everything works in a very standard way. And I appreciate your point about the scale, and maybe there are opportunities for Caribbean states, for example, to harmonize between themselves, right? So that when people come on board, maybe the country risks are different, but the intrinsic project risks and the risk allocation there should be much the same. So I think there's a lot of scope for sort of standardization and harmonization, but that has to come at the point of thinking through the strategy rather than sort of completely downstream, because at that point, these projects have diverged too much to be able to do that.
All right, thank you so much to all of our panelists. This has been really an invigorating conversation. Thank you not only for your time, but also your insights and your renewable energy that you've been putting into all of this work. Really, really deeply appreciative of being there. Setting the goal is really a first step, it's the first step to actually reaching that goal. We heard a lot of barriers. We heard a lot of solutions from people actually working on the ground to make these projects happen. So this is a very timely conversation. We look forward to the partnership in taking that work forward. And so please carry this positive message forward and out of this pavilion into your work over the next days, but also in the next 7 years, in which we will need to reach that target that we're setting ourselves. And please join me in giving a round of applause to our panel. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the COP.